You think you're humble because you don't brag. But ego doesn't need a spotlight to thrive. It just needs silence where there should be surrender. It's not always loud or arrogant. Sometimes it hides behind your quiet prayers and gentle smiles, whispering that you deserve more, that you're not being seen, that someone else is getting the glory meant for you. Ego is the voice that nods along when you say, "To God be the glory." But in your heart you're counting how many people clapped. It's the quiet rage that builds when your name isn't mentioned, when your work isn't acknowledged, when someone else is chosen first. And while you kneel in prayer, ego kneels with you, pretending to be worship while scheming for recognition. That's why Jesus said, "Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." Luke chapter 9 verse 23. Because ego doesn't want to die. It wants to be included in your calling, to ride along in your purpose, to be applauded for your obedience. And the scariest part? It often succeeds. You stand on platforms and lead prayers and share the word. But if God stripped away the audience, the likes, the praise, would you still show up? Would you still burn for Him if no one ever saw the fire? Ego wants to be seen as holy, not actually be holy. It wants the image of surrender without the cost of dying daily. That's why Paul said, "I die daily." 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 31. Because ego rises every morning with you. It meets you at the mirror and reminds you of your resume, your title, your talent. It makes you believe you're irreplaceable, indispensable, even to God. But remember this, when Elijah thought he was the only one left, God reminded him that he had 7,000 more who hadn't bowed. 1 Kings chapter 19 verse 18. Your ego will always make you feel alone so it can make you feel superior. It isolates you not for holiness but for pride. It'll make you think you're the only one doing it right, the only one with the right revelation, the only one with pure motives. But God doesn't need your uniqueness, He wants your obedience. And that's why ego must die. Not because it makes you loud, but because it makes you deaf. Deaf to conviction, deaf to wise counsel, deaf to the quiet rebuke of the Holy Spirit. You'll start calling discernment jealousy. Start labeling humility as weakness. Start confusing patience with passivity. Ego flips your spiritual compass until you call storms attacks when they're really just pruning. Until you call silence rejection when it's really protection. Until you call delay punishment when it's actually preparation. That's how subtle it is, how lethal it becomes. And God, in His mercy, will not let you keep going like that. He will break you, not because He's cruel, but because He's kind. The Lord disciplines those He loves, Hebrews chapter 12 verse 6. And if He loves you, He will not allow ego to reign over you. So He'll send you through seasons where your gift isn't noticed, where your name is forgotten, where your efforts seem wasted. Not to crush your purpose, but to crush your pride. Because until your identity is no longer attached to your performance, you cannot be trusted with power. You think you're being overlooked, but really you're being protected. God is not ignoring you, He's insulating you. Because the weight of the call will collapse anyone still propped up by ego. So He lets you feel invisible until visibility no longer tempts you. He lets you be ignored until your motives are purified. He hides you in the cave like David, not to disqualify you, but to prepare you to carry the weight of the crown without being crushed by it. Ego wants elevation, but it cannot survive consecration. And God will not anoint what ego still controls. So when you find yourself weeping in secret, wondering why the doors won't open, why the favor isn't falling, why the breakthrough feels so far away, don't just bind the devil. Ask God if He's fighting you. Because He resists the proud but gives grace to the humble, James chapter 4 verse 6. Ego makes you resist help. It makes you suspicious of correction. It makes you defend dysfunction because you're too afraid to be wrong. It whispers that you've come too far to admit weakness, too known to ask for prayer, too anointed to confess that you're struggling. And suddenly you're leading while bleeding, teaching while tormented, building while broken, and no one knows. Because ego won't let you say, "I need help." But what if your next breakthrough isn't in pushing harder, it's in surrendering deeper? What if the greatest sign of your maturity isn't how many doors you walk through, but how many you're willing to wait at without bitterness? What if real growth isn't just in the yes of heaven, but in how you handle God's not yet? Ego doesn't like waiting. It demands arrival. It craves applause. It thrives in speed. But God doesn't move on ego's schedule. He moves on surrendered hearts. That's why the wilderness matters. That's why hidden seasons are holy. Because in the silence, God doesn't just prepare your path, He purifies your soul. And when the noise is gone, when the crowd is absent, when the performance fades, what's left? Who are you without the mic, the camera, the likes? If obedience feels empty when it's unseen, then maybe it was never obedience, it was ego's performance. So God pulls you aside. He shuts the door. He blinds the eyes of others. Not because you're forgotten, but because He's jealous for your attention. He longs for the you that doesn't need to be praised. The you that doesn't crave affirmation. The you that remembers why it started in the first place. Ego forgets. Ego twists. Ego always makes it about you. But the cross was never about you being lifted up. It was about you laying down. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. Matthew chapter 16 verse 24. That's not a suggestion. That's a requirement. Because the path to glory is paved with brokenness. The road to purpose is lined with humility. And the only way to truly rise is to fall at His feet. Again and again, until there's nothing left of your ambition, only trust. Only surrender. Only Him. And you will never know just how deep ego runs until God asks you to serve where you are not seen. To give where you receive no credit. To obey without applause. And to worship when there's no music playing. That's when it shows itself, the hidden hunger to be recognized. The unspoken frustration that your faithfulness is not rewarded publicly. You will sit in rooms where others are celebrated for doing less. And the ego will nudge your heart. They don't see your value. You will watch people with lesser gifts be given greater influence. And the ego will rise like a tide whispering, they've forgotten you. And if you don't catch it in that moment, if you don't take every thought captive, 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 5, you will begin to believe the lie that God's silence means abandonment when really it's surgery. You will start crafting opportunities instead of walking in assignments. You will start networking in the flesh instead of waiting in the spirit. And suddenly, your platform becomes a Tower of Babel, built to reach heaven but founded in pride. You start with God, but then ego hijacks the wheel, convincing you that this is your moment, your name, your breakthrough, and you forget the altar. The altar is where ego dies. The altar is where Isaac is laid down, even when it looks like the promise is being killed. Genesis chapter 22. And until you're willing to put even the thing God gave you back on the altar, your ego still has a grip on you. What if God asked you to give up the very thing He used to confirm your calling? What if He tested your obedience with the blessing He gave? That's how ego gets exposed, not in the loss of things you never cared for, but in the threat of losing the thing you've made part of your identity. Ego attaches itself to titles, to ministries, to achievements, to dreams, and when God starts pruning them, you cry sabotage, not surrender. But Jesus said every branch that bears fruit must be pruned so it can bear more. John chapter 15 verse 2. Pruning is not punishment, it's preparation. But ego sees every knife as an attack. Every delay is injustice. Every closed door is betrayal. That's why ego makes such a poor servant and a worse master. It won't let you rest. It won't let you pause. It tells you that if you're not visible, you're not valuable. That if you're not growing, you're not blessed. That if you're not being noticed, you're being neglected. And yet Jesus spent 30 years hidden before 3 years of ministry. The Son of God, perfect, sinless, divine, was hidden by the Father for *3 decades. And here you are, 3 months into your purpose, already offended by the silence, already questioning the call, already measuring your worth by your reach. What if God is teaching you that private obedience carries more weight in heaven than public applause ever will? What if He's letting you be passed over so He can pass you through the fire without your ego clinging to the glory? Because if you carry ego into your destiny, it will rot the very foundation of your future. Ego will make you hard to teach, slow to repent, quick to defend, and impossible to correct. It'll make you resist every voice that doesn't flatter you. It'll make you believe feedback is an attack. That's why some of the most gifted people never mature. They build ministries around their wounds instead of letting God heal them. Ego will use your trauma as an excuse to reject accountability. It'll make you think that boldness means never needing to change. But the boldest thing you can do in the kingdom is to be moldable in God's hands. To be clay, not stone. To be soft when correction comes. To be tender when conviction hits. Because ego hardens. It calcifies your heart until you can't even cry in God's presence anymore. You'll lift your hands in worship and feel nothing. Because the throne of your heart is occupied by self. That's why David cried, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Psalm chapter 51 verse 10. Because when ego reigns, purity flees. You can't worship and worship yourself. You can't serve God and serve your image. Eventually, one must bow, and God, in His mercy, will force the issue. He'll let the thing you idolized collapse so that He can rescue the real you from the version ego built. He will tear down what He never told you to build. He will expose what you tried to hide. He will shine light on the shadows of your motivations. Not to shame you, but to set you free. Because freedom doesn't come when people approve of you. Freedom comes when you're no longer enslaved to needing their approval. That's why some of the most dangerous prisons have no walls, just pressure. The pressure to perform, to be liked, to impress, to succeed. Ego puts you in chains and hands you a microphone. It dresses you in accolades while you silently suffocate under the weight of keeping the image alive. But Jesus didn't die for an image. He died for the real you. The messy, inconsistent, fearful, often doubting you. And He loves you too much to let your ego be your Lord. That's why He'll crush it. That's why He'll confront it. That's why He'll keep you in the fire until all that remains is the reflection of Himself in you. So if you feel like things are breaking, maybe it's not the devil. Maybe it's God pulling down every idol your ego built. Every platform you trusted more than His presence. Every strategy you leaned on more than His Spirit. And if that's what it takes to make you holy, then let it burn. Let it burn until there's nothing left to prove. Until you're no longer performing for their approval. Until you can say yes to God in private with the same fire you once saved for public stages. Because ego thrives on optics, it wants to be seen praying, seen serving, seen giving. But the God who sees in secret will reward in secret. Matthew chapter 6 verse 6. And if that reward is simply more of Him, is that enough for you? Or are you addicted to being needed? That's how ego traps you, by convincing you that your worth is tied to how much others rely on you, praise you, follow you. And when that praise stops, when the phone goes silent, when the invites dry up, you start wondering if you still matter. But that's the lie. You never mattered because they called you. You mattered because He chose you. And He hasn't changed His mind. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, Romans chapter 11 verse 29. But ego will make you think they're conditional. Conditional on clout, on reputation, on fruit that others can see. But real fruit doesn't need to be posted. It ripens in silence. It matures in obscurity. And you don't need the world to taste it for it to be real. Ego screams when you're not affirmed. It sulks when someone else is celebrated. It silently competes with people you pretend to support. It studies them, not to learn, but to compare, to criticize, to feel better. And you mask it in language like, "I just want to protect the truth." But really, you just want to feel superior. You cloak pride in discernment. You wear envy like concern. But God sees through it all. Nothing is hidden from His sight. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13. He sees the bitterness you smile through. He sees the ambition beneath your fasting. He sees the competition behind your encouragement. And He will not bless what ego builds. So yes, He may tear it down. And you'll call it betrayal. You'll call it sabotage. But it will be grace. Because sometimes the most merciful thing God can do is disappoint your ego before it destroys your soul. Ego will lie to you. And worse, it will make you lie to yourself. It'll tell you you're doing this for the kingdom, when really, you're doing it to outrun your past, to prove something, to validate yourself, to get back at the ones who never saw you. But vengeance isn't vision. And until you're healed, your ambition is just revenge with a robe on. So God will sit you down. He will delay the thing you thought should have happened by now. He will let others pass you. And every time you feel the sting of being passed over, He's asking you, is your yes still yes? Even when it's not public. Even when it hurts. Even when they don't clap. Because ego can't handle the silence. It panics in the pause. It tries to kick down doors God hasn't opened. But if you force a door, you'll also have to force your way to keep it open. And what begins in ego must be maintained by ego. That's why burnout is often a symptom of ego. Not just overwork. You're tired not because God didn't equip you, but because you're carrying the version of the assignment ego built, not the one God gave. Ego always overbuilds. It adds layers of complexity God never intended. It brings people on the team not because they're called, but because they're useful. It says yes to opportunities God never sanctioned. And then when it all crashes down, ego plays the victim. Why did this happen? It cries. But deep down, you know, you were building on sand, not on the rock. And when the wind came, the fall was great. Matthew chapter 7 verses 26 to 27. But here's the grace. Even after the fall, God remains. Even after the collapse, He waits. He's not surprised. He's not shaken. He's not disappointed in the way humans are. He simply says, "Now, can we do it my way?" And if you're willing to start again, this time, without needing the credit, without needing the crowd, without needing to be the star, then you're finally ready to carry real authority. Because authority doesn't come from applause, it comes from alignment. It comes when your heart and heaven are synced, when your will has been laid at His feet, when your name is no longer the goal. And make no mistake, God will use you. But not until He's crushed you. Not until He's purified the motives, the secret pride, the hidden idols. He'll let the doors shut. He'll let the connections dry up. He'll even let your name be slandered. Not because He's cruel, but because He's clearing the stage for what actually matters. For who you are when the spotlight is gone. For what's left when the applause fades. For the version of you that heaven trusts. And if that version isn't there yet, He'll keep you hidden. He'll keep pruning. He'll keep refining. Because ego can fake growth, but only God can sustain it. And what grows in ego must be trimmed by grace. That's why you keep going in circles. That's why you keep hitting the same wall. Because God is too faithful to let ego carry His glory. He will not share His name with yours. Isaiah chapter 42 verse 8. So if it feels like everything's breaking, rejoice. That's the sound of idols falling. That's the sound of ego being silenced. That's the sound of your spirit finally becoming soft enough to hear again. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you won't just hear Him, you'll obey. So now the question remains, will you let it die? Not just talk about surrender. Not just post about humility. But truly lay your ego on the altar and walk away empty? Because God can't fill what's already full of self. And He won't breathe on a vessel still leaking pride. This is your moment, not to rise, but to kneel. Not to build, but to be broken. The deeper the surrender, the greater the oil, the quieter the heart, the clearer His voice. You don't need a platform to be powerful. You don't need to be famous to be faithful. You don't need to be followed to be fruitful. But you do need to be clean. You do need to be holy. You do need to be surrendered. So let it go. Let the image die. Let the hunger for praise be starved out. Let the applause grow silent in your soul. Until only one voice matters. Until only one name is lifted high. Until only one purpose consumes you. Not to be great, but to be His. You weren't born to impress the world. You were chosen to reflect heaven. So crush the ego, burn the idol, and become the vessel God intended you to be.